Monotype.
Welcome to Creative Characters, a show where we meet the people working at the intersection of type and everyday life. My name's Carl, and I'm here this week with a special guest, one of our producers, Mia. How you doing, Mia?
Hey, Carl. How's it going?
Not great today. I am tired. Just got back from Adobe Max, and I am on a one-way struggle bus to nowhere today.
Oh, yeah. I can imagine you're probably super wiped out.
Yes, but I am excited to share the podcast episode we recorded at Max. That'll be coming out in a few weeks, so keep an eye out for that. We met with dozens of amazing people, both speakers and attendees alike. Great stories, great individuals, and some pretty interesting perspective on where the world of design stands right now. So definitely keep an eye out for that later this month or in early November. But I'm also excited for this week's episode.
Yeah. So, Carl, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you met this week's guest, Allison Tipton, while you were traveling in Baltimore with your son.
Yeah, we were in Baltimore in late August and were invited up to the Maryland Institute College of Art to visit the printmaking studio, which is Allison's baby. And what's special about the printmaking studio at MICA is that it actually hosts the archives of the Globe Press. Globe was a production house printing studio in Baltimore that ran for many, many decades, and they specialized in promotional posters for everything from rock and R&B concerts to wrestling matches. And currently, one of their sort of annual projects is something called I'm going to get the name wrong, but something along the lines of the Deviled Egg Festival.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, that was a fun one. And what's great about the Globe is that, yeah, they were a high volume production house that also did amazing artistic work. They were known for their distinctive use of color, bright fluorescent colors, and that was often paired with heavy black wood type. So it was a very recognizable and memorable look that was designed to stand out from the grays and browns of the urban landscape. And, you know, the students at MICA they have just this great resource available to them. The printmaking studio is, you know, full of lead type and wood type, tons of machinery and things that they can practice on. And it's just a magic place. I mean, print studios in general are just magical places, but there was something special about walking in there and being surrounded by so much living, active history that students are learning from today.
That sounds like a really cool experience.
Yeah, I could have stayed there all day, but we had to go.
So, Carl, how did you hear about Globe?
So it's funny, the Baltimore Orioles, a local baseball team, put out an alternate jersey uniform this spring that actually featured typography inspired by the Globe Press. They weren't directly involved, but the word Baltimore is set across the front of the uniform in wood type. It's unmistakable as wood type. Carl,
I feel like blending baseball jerseys with wood type seems like a sort of nirvana for you.
Yes, well, that's it. It really was sort of the perfect combination of my son's interests and my interests. So when I saw that, I reached out to the Globe and got in touch with Allison, and you know we talked and I invited her on the show, and actually put her in touch with Charles Nix, who is, you know, a walking encyclopedia of printmaking history, and of course was familiar with the Globe. So it was a perfect match for today's episode. So really excited for all of you to listen to Charles and Allison tell the story of the Globe Press.
So Allison Tipton is the coordinator of the Globe Collection and Press at MICA, which is the Maryland Institute College of Art. She's a graduate of MICA in Baltimore, Maryland. Allison Tipton, welcome to the Creative Characters podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
There are probably a lot of people who are listening to this now who don't know about Globe and its role in music and culture, or even what Globe is. So I was wondering if you could describe Globe for a newbie.
So Globe Poster Printing Corporation was founded in Baltimore in 1929, and they pretty quickly became one of the largest show card printers in the country, and they were printing inexpensive posters for everyday people. So fairs and carnivals, boxing, racing, wrestling, big band. But their claim to fame both stylistically and in the clients they're printing for, happens in the 50s and 60s with R&B and rock and roll. So clients like James Brown, Marvin Gaye, Aretha Franklin, B.B. King, Muddy Waters. If they were Black and on tour, there's a really good chance that Globe was printing posters for them because their footprint wasn't just in Baltimore or the Mid-Atlantic. It was upstate New York, down the eastern seaboard, along the Gulf into Texas. So they were really far-reaching, and they were printing for these artists as they were on tour nationally. In the 50s, they developed this really distinct styling of mixing screen-printed backgrounds with letterpress text. So fluorescent bursts and clouds of color with black text layered on top in this landscape of trees and brick and concrete. That light's going to catch your eye at night when your car headlights hit that, or a light post hits that poster, it's going to reflect back. It's easy to see. So artists love them because whether you were the headliner or the MC on the foot of the bill, everybody had their own paragraph that they were in. The posters were easy to read. Globe's whole thing was if you couldn't read it in 3 seconds or less, it wasn't a successful poster. And then they carry this style of printing forward into the late 70s to early 90s with go-go music in DC. And Globe was printing for these go-go artists every night of the week in all 4 quadrants of the city. Globe holds on until about 2011, where we have Facebook at that point. We're not using posters to advertise events. They're printing those mattress sale going out of business signs. So they had this really epic heyday and this kind of dwindling ending. And the Maryland Institute College of Art, there was a community of movement of people, designers, printers, historians here and down, who talked MICA into acquiring the majority of Globe's assets, keeping it here in Baltimore and keeping it intact. That's how we get here today.
Me having grown up around printing, I immediately start to think about the sights and sounds and smells of a printing house. And when it comes to sounds especially, I wonder if you could describe some of that atmosphere, both in the old Globe before it moved to MICA and the new Globe.
Absolutely. I had the privilege of going to Globe's last location, which was in Baltimore's Highlandtown neighborhood. And so you walk in and you got hit in that face with that commercial screen printing UV ink smell. And it just I don't really know how to describe it. It's just this heavy chemical smell that sits in your nose and gets on your clothes and you smell like it for the rest of the day. I love that smell because of Globe.
You and I are the same, yes.
So it smelled like commercial UV screen printing ink. And it's different now because at MICA, we print with water-based inks, which don't really smell like much. The sound of wood type kind of sounds like mahjong blocks. There's this kind of clanking and the tabletops are steel. So you get the sound of the wood banging on each other and the metal as we're packing everything up and wood drawers sliding in and out.
We both can imagine the incredible sort of printing ink smell and the blanket wash smell. How many presses were running during its heyday?
They had 8 presses that weighed somewhere between 20 and 25,000 pounds apiece. And they were on the 8th floor of what had previously been, it's called the Candler Building, what had previously been a Coca-Cola bottling plant. And when Coke moved out, all these print shops moved in because the buildings were built for that industrial weight. So they had 8 of these 20+ thousand pound presses on the 8th floor, just rumbling along. The reason they had 8 was that they had 2 yellow presses, 2 blue presses, 2 red, 2 black, so that if a press ever went down, production never stopped. And then they were running screen printing presses as well. The music posters were printed with the fluorescent screen printing with the black type, but a lot of Globe's carnival stuff, which was really the bread and butter of their business from the very beginning to the very end, was all letterpress. So they had 2 for everything. So it was loud. There were people working. I think in their heyday, they had something like 35 employees.
From what I've read, they fit into a city that was very much about printing. Baltimore was a printing city, and more importantly to me, and maybe to you, a typographic city. I wonder if you could describe a bit about that history of printing in Baltimore, maybe some of the places where it was concentrated, and a little bit about how Globe does or doesn't fit into that history.
Baltimore has an awesome printing history, and I don't think it's not an accident that it happened. So printing goes back to really the early settlements of Baltimore as people were immigrating to the Americas. People were setting up print shops, and a lot of those printers that were coming were also German, who were bringing this printing knowledge with them. And so some of the biggest print shops, especially lithographers, were based here in Baltimore. I think the biggest was Hone and Company, but then there were prints that were made. The Bird's Eye View of Baltimore, which was this 12-panel lithograph that was like 10 and a half feet wide and 5 feet tall. And it was printed in 1869. And it was supposed to have represented every building, church, business, house in the city. Like they had walked around the city for months sketching and then went back and made these huge lithographs. And at the time, it was said to be like the largest panoramic view of an American city.
So the scale of those lithostones must have been magnificent. I mean, they're done actual size on actual stones that weigh a ton.
They had to have weighed tons apiece. I've heard the Hone lithography has been out of business for many years, but the building is currently on the east side of the city, and it's undergoing a renovation. I got to tour the building because they had found a bunch of old lithographs above the vault where the art room had been. They had like backfilled parts of the building with old lithostones as they retired the stones and moved on to more contemporary practices. And so they were digging up pallets of lithostone. I've also heard that Baltimore's harbor, like there's parts along the waterline that are also all old lithostones.
I mean, we could probably spend an entire podcast episode just talking about Germany and the birth of chromolithography.
Yeah.
But suffice it to say, it was a predecessor to what we consider like modern printing, offset lithography. And yeah, it involved drawing on gigantic stones. And it's all very direct. It's very artistic.
And related to letterpress, and I have to get this one in here, is the Ottmar Mergenthaler lived in Baltimore, and he invented the linotype machine here in Baltimore before production was moved to Brooklyn.
I love that story. I'm going to make it a bedtime story for my children because it's an amazing pivotal point in the history of typography, but also in the history of commerce. The culmination of technologies that took place in Baltimore at that moment to try and solve the problem of distributing proceedings of the Congress that led to the creation of the linotype machine. It's astounding to imagine the impact that that had on modern economics.
Yeah. And it's all here. And all these printers knew each other. They all went to church together. The Zion Lutheran Church was where all the German printers in Baltimore worshipped. Like the church has a linotype stained glass window as an ode to Mergenthaler. And they have some of his lights from his library in their library collection.
So that's a great backdrop for Globe, which, you know, for all of that sort of rich history that we consider the foundations of printing in America, Globe is a different thing.
Yeah, they're a little bit wild. Like if you think about how fine and detailed and labor-intensive lithography is, here's Globe printing letterpress posters. And we always say in like design and printing, you get two of the three. You get quality, speed, and price. Globe was speed and price. They were fast and cheap and kind of down and dirty. They weren't fine art printers.
But they really had a clear idea from what you've described, a clear idea of what it took to be successful in the area that they had chosen. And they just went.
Well, they had a formula to it because there were multiple Globe posters across the country. But I would argue that Globe Baltimore is the most famous because of the clients they were printing for and this unique style that they had developed. But it was brothers and cousins, and what they would do is they'd move to a city, set up a print shop, leave one of those relatives behind to run the print shop, and then move on to the next one. So there's a Globe Baltimore, there's a Globe Chicago, which that collection is at the Hamilton Wood Type and Printing Museum. There was a Globe St. Louis, there was one in Austin, there was an Associated print shop in Atlanta, Triangle Press, which is in Philly, was once part of this family empire. So they moved to cities to set up poster printing shops. And what Globe Baltimore developed to be was sort of its own beast.
It sounds like you have always been a letterpress printer, but there must have been some point, some sort of like spark that lit in you that drew you to it. Can you describe how you got into printing and letterpress?
So I was a student at the Maryland Institute, and I think I spent most of my sophomore year making the world's worst graphic design work possible. And by my junior year, I was like, I either need to figure out this design thing or I need to find something else to do because I am never going to get employed. And I took a letterpress class and a screen printing class, 2 classes kind of simultaneously, looking to do design that was not at the computer. And I sort of fell in love with letterpress because there's a structure to it. Letterpress likes linear lines, and you are working with the materials in the shop. And at the time, MICA had a decent letterpress shop. We had a lot of metal type, a really sad couple of cases of wood type, but I fell in love with the process of how all of these existing pieces could be recontextualized to make new design work. And so a lot of the work I was making for my graphic design classes was letterpress based. Even my digital work was using the structure of how I think about setting up like letterpress forms for printing.
Globe was not in the picture at that point.
No.
So how funny is it that you find in silkscreen and letterpress the sort of things that speak to you, and then right around the corner in your future is, I mean, delivered to your doorstep essentially, is an archive of letterpress and silkscreen.
I mean, in hindsight, it all makes sense. So my letterpress teacher is a woman. Her name's Mary Mashburn. She's a designer printer here in Baltimore. And we went on our first field trip to Globe. Colin Ford, who's a typographer, was helping this guy named Joe Galbraith, who was a graphic design MFA student at the time. And Colin was going to Globe with Joe and helping him sort through things. And Colin was in my letterpress class, and he was like, we should go visit this print shop. Let's go on a field trip. And Mary was like, okay. So that was my first introduction to Globe through this class. And Colin, we remember walking in and being like, I didn't even know this much wood type could exist in one place. Like, this is bonkers. And we met Bob Cicero, who is the last owner of Globe, and he toured us through everything. And we were just like, what is this place? And it's kind of dark, and it's an old print shop, so it's got a layer of dirt on everything.
Yeah, hard to describe that. What comes along with machines running for that long? You just get a layer of everything, yeah.
Yeah, it smelled like screen printing ink, and that's how I knew Globe existed. And then I stayed in contact with Mary through my time at MICA in sort of December of 2010. She was like, Globe's closing, and I think MICA should buy the collection. And I was like, well, what can I do? And she was like, well, I need to involve students in this to convince the school that like this is actually something students want and that I'm not just like on a wild goose chase here. So Mary is the mastermind behind talking MICA into buying Globe. And so they agreed to buy this collection without really knowing what they were getting into. And then I spent my spring break there cleaning and packing type to move it to MICA.
This sounds a lot like Big Man in Little Jacket, or like things that don't fit into other spaces. It sounds like there's just no way that all of that can go into a new home. What was the sorting process like? And is there a cache of stuff that exists somewhere else, or was there a deaccessioning?
So the one part of convincing MICA to buy this collection that wasn't a road bump was where to store it all. MICA had just acquired a warehouse, and that warehouse was currently empty.
Oh, wow.
So I think they were kind of excited that they had stuff to put in the warehouse. Mm-hmm. So we moved 16 box trucks worth of stuff, and not the cute little U-Hauls, the ones that are like almost semis, from Globe's last location to MICA. And so some of the collection in its current state lives at MICA. We have in our printmaking building what we refer to as the working collection. So the wood type that we use to make new work and to teach with. We have a collection of posters and archival materials here that we use to teach with and show and tour and whatnot. And then a lot of the wood type and the tools for printing, all of the faceplates of the performers that Globe was printing for, that stuff's all at MICA's warehouse. And then we have a partnership with Johns Hopkins University Sheridan Libraries, and they store all of our posters and archivally sensitive materials for us. MICA is not a collecting school. We don't have a museum as part of the institution, so we're not really equipped to deal with large archivally sensitive materials. So we've been fortunate that Hopkins is, and Hopkins cares a lot about Baltimore's history. We took everything we could fit on the truck and that Bob would let us take from Globe to MICA, and it's kind of spread out in a bunch of places where I can go like rummage around and find the things I need.
It sounds just too perfect. At first, from the outside, you're like, okay, I kind of get it. It's a beautiful collection of posters that paint a beautiful history, visual history of American culture through the middle to late 20th century. That part makes complete sense with a school like MICA. But then it really does take what you've just described in sort of a collision of circumstances for it to actually become a part of MICA and to really make sense. Who could have predicted that there would be an empty warehouse just at the right place?
I know. It was the best timing possible. And we brought all the physical stuff to MICA, and I think one of the other most important parts is we brought Bob Cicero with us, too. So Globe opened in 1929. Bob's dad, Joe Cicero Sr., starts working there in November of 1934. He moves his way up the ranks from a form boy, someone who sweeps the floor and puts type away, to the shop foreman. And his lifelong dream is to own Globe Poster, which he does in 1975. And he's no spring chicken at that point. Like, he's at the age where most people are retiring. And so we brought Bob and all of that printing wisdom with us to MICA. So his first class at MICA was the fall of, I guess that would have been like 2011. And he teaches every semester. He's great because I'll be working on projects and he usually comes in kind of early and he'll be like milling around. And if I'm like, oh, I'm so busy, I can't do this thing, I need to typeset this poster, he's like, oh, well, I can do that for you. Or he'll like push me out of the way and be like, no, let me show you how to do that. Like, oh, okay.
I'm glad that you brought him up and him as, I mean, not to call him part of the acquisition, but essentially part of the acquisition. Quite often the artifacts and the artists get separated after that much time passes. It's amazing to have that kind of touchstone, a living, breathing piece of history to come along with the collection to sort of keep it grounded in the vitality. You see pieces of design history especially, and it's difficult to reconstruct how they came to be, but now you have somebody who can really play that part for you.
Bob's wonderful. Like, if I'm looking at something in the archive and I'm like, why is this like this? He can usually give me a good reason for why they would have done that. We've done oral histories with him and his brother so that we make sure that we're preserving that knowledge and the stories from Globe. You can be like, Bob, what's this thing? And he'll be like, well, let me tell you the story. We're super fortunate that the whole Cicero family has been incredibly generous with their time and patience with MICA.
I wonder if you could talk about the things that aren't posters. We've mentioned the type, we've mentioned some of the tools, but I wonder if you could talk about image cuts and photo cuts and the thing that sort of thrills me the most, the idea of sets.
Yeah. When we talk about Globe as a collection, it's not just a bunch of old posters. We have about 7,500 individual posters in our collection, but most of them are late 80s through the 2000s. Globe moved in the late 70s, and they don't take all of that 50s and 60s era stuff with them because they don't see it as artwork or something that should be archived. It was job work to them. It was ephemeral. It was up one day and down the next. So unfortunately, a lot of that stuff didn't survive. But the reason we know who Globe was printing for is that we have all of the faceplates, the halftone images of the performers. These faceplates are usually zinc, sometimes copper halftone plates that are mounted on wood to be type high. American type high is 0.918. And so whether it's a wood type or one of these image plates or a hand-carved block, as long as they're all that same 0.918 height, they're going to print.
They're type high, just like a piece of type, like a lowercase t or a lowercase e would be type high.
Yeah. And there's about 8,000 of them.
Holy cow.
Yeah, it is anyone and everyone they ever printed for. It is our best record of the artist. So I've got a box that's just, it's in my teaching archive, and it's box G19. And that's just my box of Marvin Gaye heads. We got like big Marvin, who's like 8x10. And then there's like little Marvin, who's like 3x4, and all these different poses. We've got Marvin, the poet, with his like sock hat on. We got like young, handsome, sexy Marvin. So, and same with James Brown, like their careers are documented in these blocks and these different iterations of them. And Globe had a really organized system to them. Every block is marked. They're usually written on the back who it is, or they have a Ludlow like a metal cast slug nailed to the bottom that has their name on it. But they also put information on there, like the dates the blocks were made. Sometimes they'll have hit songs scribed on the back. And then they had a system for organization. So they were the first letter of the last name and a number. And Globe had bookcases that they would store them in, and they had records so they could find them, because the blocks were an expensive part of making a poster. And so once they had them on file, they could just keep reusing the same blocks over and over again. And my understanding is they had this sort of neurotic compositor who worked for them, who did all of this labeling. And when they would take blocks out of circulation, he would pack them away alphabetically and roughly by year. So when we got the collection, we got handed these blocks that were organized roughly by year and name. And so it made the like archiving of those really easily. When we got them, they were in big giant refrigerator boxes. Now they're all in like archival foam, just higher than type high boxes, and there's 800 boxes or something like that live on shelves. So I have a spreadsheet where I can go and find things. I just did a project recently with Bobby Rush on the poster, and the promoter that I was working with was like, do you have any old image blocks of Bobby Rush? And I was like, well, let me see what I can do. And I went to the warehouse and I found 3 different Bobby Rush blocks.
Amazing. It's like, somebody not just changing the wheels on a moving bus, but polishing the wheels on a moving bus. To be able to do that kind of archiving as a full-blown, industrial printing shop is taking place. It's an amazing gift to the future.
He did us such a favor. I am eternally grateful to him for having taken that time and care rather than just like throwing them to the side.
Tell me a little bit more about the other tools other than presses and sort of press furniture.
So we have all the face plates. So we interchangeably use face plates and photo cuts. And then we have hand-carved blocks. So Globe had this staff artist named Harry Knorr. And to the best of our knowledge, Harry was a sign painter by trade, which you can see in a lot of the like 50s and 60s era posters. They have this beautiful lettering styling to them. He's got this beautiful brush hand. He's got this kind of bouncing Gothic styling that he uses. Sometimes it's inline. Sometimes he had a punch. So sometimes they have like an inline dot. But he wasn't painting with a brush. He was cutting with an X-Acto knife. So the lettering, instead of having this kind of soft edge, has like 90-degree angles on it, which is, I think, kind of unique. And so we have all this beautiful, we refer to it as the visual language, like live, in person, band and show and dance, all these race car signage for like 500 laps, 250 laps, mid-carnival stuff that's like Midway Explosion, my personal favorite, which is Clean, Moral, Refined. And so all of the wood type in our collection is Gothic, and it's every height and width that the catalog made in volume. Globe is a production shop, so it's not one drawer of anything. It's like 7 drawers packed to the brim, and the stuff is breeding because I keep finding more of it. And then we have things like business records, the Rolodex that has Tina Turner's phone number in it, the sketches of posters when they were drawn by the front of the house before they were handed off to the compositors, some of the hand-cut ruby liths, the sketches that went with them. Any number of creepy clowns you could possibly imagine. Magicians. Oh, there's some stuff that you're like, why? Who thought this was okay? And then the tools of the trade. The metal frames that we use to build the poster forms in, my favorite Scrabble word, coins, Quoin, which are the wedges that put pressure to hold the forms together. So you can take them from a flat surface and stand them up and walk them over to the press.
And then sets.
And sets, yeah.
So describe a set.
There are many pieces to this collection, and these are not all individual categories. These are pieces of the collection that all go together. So an example would be, we have a James Brown poster. And in that set, we also have the hand-carved lettering for James Brown's name, the background printing plate, the James Brown name, the faceplate of his head that was used to print the image, and then the final poster that went with it. And so the idea is we were setting up all of this archive, or sort of underlying structure to our archiving, is that it's one thing to have the James Brown poster, but we need to be able to say, okay, well, here's all these other pieces that are tied to this poster that come together intellectually and physically.
They're well worth checking out on the Globe website. And I'm dying to come down and see some sets in person. Of course, to see the posters in person too, and just to exist in a letterpress shop is really exciting to me, always. I have a few favorites. I'm sure you have a few favorites too. My most favorite is the Two Live Crew Summerfest Saturday, August 29th poster. Not because it's like incredibly indicative of Globe's output, but because of the artists like Kool Moe Dee, Jazzy Jeff, and the Fresh Prince. The color's fantastic, and the graphics are fantastic. I love the combination of type, and I love where it exists in music history, too. It's sort of like a moment of cassette to CD, like late Globe, but all the earmarks of what made them great are there. But it seems almost modern and almost antique at the same time. And there's another piece of lettering for Fats Domino with a little bit of dotted inline that just makes me so happy. It does make me think so much of the music of Fats Domino also. It's just like full of vim and vitality. What are your favorites?
So my favorite is one that is not yet on the website. It's a poster for Carr's Beach, and it's not even a finished poster. So Carr's Beach is really significant in Maryland. During segregation, Carr's Beach was one of 2 black beaches in Maryland, and Carr's Beach was a stop on the Chitlin circuit. So artists like James Brown played there, so you'd beach and swim and picnic during the day, and then you'd go see these musical acts at night. And this particular poster in our collection is not even a finished poster. It's just the shell. It's just the artwork. So it's on top, it's this like blue cloud shape with a woman in a red bathing suit, and she's holding like a ski rope. And then in the middle of the poster, it has this Carr's Beach hand lettered, like the cars and the beach like wrap around each other. And on the bottom, there's children diving in, and I think it says like big show or something like that. They're like jumping off the diving board, which is also the lettering to the poster. And I love this poster because it's a 3-color screen print. It's baby blue, fluorescent pink, and yellow. And from those 3 colors, they get all of these like crazy color overlapping, including where they overlap all 3 to get the darker brown skin tone of the figures represented. And it's just this like beautiful poster that without words on it is like a standalone art piece. And it's this just absolutely day glow vibrant. I will make an effort to get it up on the website so that other people can enjoy it.
Please do. Yeah, that would be quite a coup for people who are listening to you describe it, because it does sound beautiful. The only thing that's missing from my picture as you describe it is a sense of the scale. And maybe that goes for all of the Globe output. I mean, one of the things that people are often struck by with posters is how large they actually are. Like, we all own posters, but real posters can get quite large.
They're hefty. So Globe had a couple of standard sizes, their smallest being 14 by 22. That's what most of the carnival posters were. It's an old theater marquee size, but the music posters are big, and it kind of depends on how many acts are on the bill. The biggest ones are 22 by 35. And then there's a slightly smaller, like 22 by like 30. But they're big, and they take up a lot of space. It takes 2 hands to lift them and move them around safely.
Which I suppose begs another question. Is it possible to arrange for a visit? Are there any exhibitions that take place regularly? How can people actually see Globe posters in person?
We do visits by appointment. So the best way for people to make appointments is to email me. You can do it through the website. It's globe@mica.edu. I'm the person that answers those emails, and you can set up an appointment to come visit, and we can tour through it. I'll show you the things you want to see. Pull out the grand slams like Carr's Beach and Two Live Crew.
I wonder if you could sort of almost play us out with a loving description of another favorite poster.
I will put the Carr's Beach one up on the website. My next favorite one is, I described the set. It's the James Brown poster. It's James Brown's head on a purple background, and it's got this beautiful, on a slant, James Brown lettering with like an inline stroke to it. And it's kind of 2 purple rectangle shapes, and it says The Fabulous and his name and his head. And I love that poster because Globe does a lot of multi-act posters. They were absolute masters of it. But I love the contrast of those crazy busy multi-acts to this like standalone artist hanging out on this poster, doing his thing, like just being James Brown in all his glory. And I like that one a lot because we have the whole poster set to it. I have only ever seen it in purple, but I've been told by Bob that they also really frequently printed it in green. So if anyone has the green version, I would like to see a picture of it. But I love that one. It's just this vibrant purple. It just has all of the right pieces to it in its simplicity.
And it's James Brown.
And it's James Brown.
Allison, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you. I am going to come visit Baltimore. I am going to make you take me to church to see the Ottmar Mergenthaler stained glass windows and point out former sites of printing history in Baltimore. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for walking us through the shop.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for letting me talk at length about how much I love Globe.
To read about the history of Globe or see what they're up to, visit globeatmica, all one word, .com, or follow them on Instagram at globeatmica. As always, look for a link to our blog post in the show notes of this episode, and check out monotype.com/podcast to read about all of our prior guests. If you've been enjoying our podcast, please go to Apple Podcasts or Spotify to rate and review this episode. And if you really like us, subscribe to the show and share us with your friends. Creative Characters is brought to you by Monotype and is produced by Christopher Olin, Mia Sullivan, and Marie Tabarez. We'll be back with more episodes soon. Take care, everybody.